You're watching the Leadership Forum. What is the ideal Kenya that you want? Kenya Tuitakayo movement is on. It was launched yesterday, and of course also they're seeking views from Kenyans on what the ideal Kenya that they do want. And I'm holding court this morning with Sam Muhochi, who is the Executive Director of ICJ, that is the International Commission of Jurists. Also, we do have with us Mary Mukundia. She's a leadership coach and also the CEO of CDI Africa. We do have with us as well George Kigoro, who is Executive Director of Kenya Human Rights Commission, and John Githongo, who is the Executive Director of Inuka Trust. Right, let's just hear from you. We promised to circle back with you, John. Good morning, and good to see you as well. Kenya Tuitakayo. What is the ideal Kenya? Mary says this is not the first time that we've been here. What do you think this particular movement now will bring as a substantial difference, maybe to the previous attempt?
I think one of the things that makes Kenya special, and I'm not an advocate of Kenyan exceptionalism, but I think Kenya is unique in many ways, and I think one of the ways that Kenya is unique is the capacity of its citizens to organize themselves to bring about positive change in the way that they are governed. Whether it's about constitutional reform, whether it's about removing Section 2A, whether it's protesting various things we organize, whether it's through civil society, then we had churches at the forefront. In fact, this is not the first Kenya Tuitakayo. We've had one before, and all the freedoms that we enjoy, the new constitution that we enjoy, the fact that Nation TV has a license that is able to invite us here is as a result of these struggles, like Kenya Tuitakayo, that comes now at an important time when we have a combination of factors, some of which my colleagues here have articulated very well, but we still have a corruption crisis in this country, this time combined with an austerity crisis, where the poor are being forced to pay for the profligacy and corruption of the elite. We have a political transition coming in. This is President Kenyatta's last term constitutionally, the stroke of constitutional reform. So there is also a need to protect this constitution that took many Kenya Tuitakayos to bring us to this point. So it's not only about protecting the gains that we have achieved so far, but taking us this next step at this rather fragile time, not only for Kenya, but for much of the world, which is in a very fragile economic time.
Right, George, so you're calling on Kenyans to rise and fight against impunity as well as claim political and economic freedom. First of all, before we even launch here, could we maybe try and highlight some of the high spots that we got from the previous initiative as well? That can be a learning lesson and also maybe a guiding post where we're headed with this particular initiative right now.
I think the previous initiative was the Kenya we want. It came about in the early 1990s. At that time, the big debate in the country was whether or not then there was need for constitutional reforms. The Kanu state denied the need for constitutional reforms. So the Kenya Tuitakayo organized to demonstrate that constitutional reforms were necessary and had their place at the time. And so the highlight of that organization at the time was the creation of pamphlets in several local languages that explained a vision for the Kenya we want at that time, and the drafting in 1995 of a model constitution. So the fact that a model constitution was created, it fired up imagination and said, it's kind of moved the debate beyond whether or not constitutional reforms are necessary into the space of, if we were to do constitutional reforms, what might the content of those reforms be? So the Kenya Tuitakayo movement of that time is the one that started the clamor for constitutional reforms that were realized in 2010. It took a long time, but that is where it started in the early 90s.
All right.
So, but before that, before the constitutional reforms, a reform moment came in 1997, where the reform forces were saying no reforms, no elections. And that is what led to sort of these abridged reforms through the IPPG process of 1997, getting rid of the Chiefs Authority Act, getting rid of sedition laws, expanding the electoral management body's composition to include participation by opposition groups, and so on and so forth. So that so there was a small reform thing that occurred in 1997 as a result of those efforts, which then was big enough to please the opposition to participate in the election. And then because it wasn't ultimately sufficient, the clamor continued after the 1997 election and culminated in the constitutional reform process that went on at Bomas at a later point in time.
All right, let's hear from Sam Mohoche, and we trying to also look deeply, because we had Angelica Baberi saying that the talk, especially the talk on the constitutional change and the referendum right now, she says this may take us back from where we came from. But should we go back to where we came from and try and see where we lost it? Where did we lose a plot? Because right now everyone in Kenya, or maybe this is the driving of the politicians' agenda as well, as far as the referendum is concerned, and we're not seeing the bigger picture. I don't know what will be your ideal position on this particular reforms that people now are clamoring for.
No, it's documented that our national memory is only 21 days. And the Kenya Tuitakayo initiative is actually a mutation. It's been evolving since late last year. The reason why we are now talking about handshake, which is not anchored in any law, is because of the manner in which we handled the election last year. And I tend to think that we should always recall, because it's quite frustrating to many people that we have to come in and say, okay, what is the position of the citizen? If you look at the citizen, the charter that was launched yesterday, it is an affirmation by the citizens that we want to reassert our rights. We want our voices to be heard. That uniqueness is the difference. Let's hear out the citizens. We've met groupings, small-scale importers, clearing and forwarding agents. You have people who have been evicted under very inhumane circumstances in Nairobi, Mombasa, and the state is just asserting and saying the state exists, so we have to do this. They don't care whether people will be rendered homeless. Is that right? Kenya has been exposed to a lot of public debt. Are the citizens adequately involved? Now that we have this situation of debt management, the state is going back to the citizens' pockets. Can the citizens' voices be heard? How do we want to proceed? You recall that the Building Bridges, for example, initiative talked about lifestyle audits. How are they being conducted? Who is doing it? Is it being done within the law? Is there a time frame? Do we expect results? These are the questions the citizens have to ask. When you see the mess created with importation of goods into the country, the delays occasioned, that is stifling commerce. So you find there are very many sectors, different sectors, that would wish for an ideal that does not exist, and they do not have the platform. So I think this provides an opportunity to involve citizenry in commenting and contributing in identifying the problem, as opposed to jumping the gun and saying, let's rush to constitutional referendum. We are internally trying to look at implementation of the Constitution so far.
Yes.
Trying to identify what is the problem in implementation. Is it the law? Is it the people? And how best that can be addressed. And that is why we have not taken the position that we support referendum or we oppose. And we tend to think that this has to be a much more in-depth, consultative and objective process.
Right. Mary?
I'm still not clear. Are there laws or are there not laws? Are there systems? Are there complaint channels? Yes, it's important to inform the citizenry on the key issues that are required. But as you've said, if there is property being taken over, or there is importers not able to process, what are the current laws? What are the current ways that we can address that issue? Are people following those channels of addressing those concerns, going to the courts, raising up the objectives according to the legal process that there are? If there are laws, then let's follow them, let's implement them. Because honestly, in my view, is that there is a lot of complaining by ourselves, by the citizenry, but what responsibility and ownership do we as citizens, either as business groups, as landowners, or whatever it is, to try and make sure that we follow that through? And that, to me, is my point. There's always, in a functioning society, going to be ills in a system. What is it that we're doing practically, following the causes written out in law to try and address them? There's the overall, in terms of visioning, what can be done. But the immediate thing is not to go to the overall visioning and saying we're going to change the whole structure, is to go through the system and the processes that are there. If you don't follow the processes and the systems that are there, then are you saying that the law is not valid and is not going to be useful? And I'm telling, from my point of view, we're a functioning society.
Yes.
There are many ills, but how do we positively address these functions as ourselves to make sure that they're done? How do we increase open government? How do we increase accountability of the people that are there? And I've seen a lot of change, whether it's in to do with the, hudumia wananchi. If I look years ago, getting IDs, getting, passports, filing your taxes. By the time you're actually making institutions accountable for what is they're supposed to do, making them open that we can see what is happening, we're able to get them to be more accountable. What's happening at the registrar of companies to ensure that there is data available and open to us? You can Google, who is this company, who are the directors? Then we can allow investigative journalism or ourselves to understand who owns what is moving into that. Those are the systems we should be forcing and ensuring are working well. We used to have this thing of putting in what you've talked about, the wealth reports.
Yes.
I was there. All of us used to write them. What happens to those papers? Are they accessible? Are they digitized so that we can read who owns what, and then we can audit their lifestyle? Those are the things, to me, that there's enough systems and structures that we should be pushing to be working, as opposed to saying that we need to rejig the system or we need to do 100% audit, and if it doesn't work, then we start a new system. That's what we as citizens, for myself, I am tired. We politicize and are politicking from January to December, 5 years in a row. When are we going to be building the nation?
So maybe we should also be, I think, on the context of wealth declaration, because we know this particular exercise has been ongoing. The government has been harping on it. But what are you as civil society, and I know Merishi is not really part of it, but you collectively as a civil society as well, what are you doing to put tails on some of these pronouncements that we get from the government or our political leaders who come out to the fore and say, yes, we shall start a wealth declaration? We see there's so much drama and melodramatic actions on it, then it tapers off, and no one actually is putting tails on it. John? The civil society has been fairly, it's studiously silent on so many things. Even we wondered, was the handshake extended also to the civil society as well?
I don't think we've been silent, Debril. I think that's unfair. We've been very, very clear about some of these promises that have been made with regard to things like the audits, lifestyle audits. I think we even had the suggestion made by the president with regard to the use of lie detector machines on civil servants. And the point that was made at the time is that, for the last 6 years, this regime has been masterful at promising, but under-delivering massively on issues of accountability and anti-corruption. And that's something which we emphasize. So when the promises were made, again, we said, okay, let's watch and see. We hope for the best, but we don't expect very much. The process of public officials having to declare their assets and liabilities was something which has been there since 2004. I think if you go to the Public Service Commission today, you should still find that all public officials above a certain rank have to fill out their form every year. And there's a repository there. There was a space that was created that is there. And those documents are accessible via court order by people like the Anti-Corruption Commission and any other competent authority. So those systems exist, the information exists. What has been lacking, the disconnect, has been the will to initiate the action, to say, okay, we're going to interrogate. This is Debril's asset declaration over the last 6 years. This is Githongo's over the last 6 or 7 years, and we're going to use it to ask, how come he's earning a salary of X but is living a lifestyle that is very different from that. So what we've seen, Kenya doesn't lack in systems, in laws, in procedures. We're very good at them. We're very good at producing reports as well. We have people from academics from developed countries coming to study our anti-corruption infrastructure here in terms of our legal regime, because it is so sophisticated. What is unique here is that once we put it in place, we don't use it. It's as if putting it on paper it means that it works. Once you put it down, once it exists, it has to be implemented. And sometimes it has led, I believe, to a widespread, very fundamental skepticism, which is what you're feeling. A skepticism that despite all the promises, despite all the new initiatives that are being pronounced, that this is not really serious. This is something which will grab headlines. It's very, very interesting. It's very, it gets a good headline that we're going to have lifestyle audits, that we're going to do lie detectors for public officials. But, as Sam said, 21 days later, it's gone, and people are back to complaining. And I think they complain with due cause, because they say, hold on, we keep on being promised something, but where's the delivery? The machinery is in place, but it is not being used. And that is a deliberate political failure. Very deliberate.
All right. Yes.
Well, maybe just a quick one on what John has said on that issue, that those declaration of assets have been there from the 2000, I remember, and they are available. If civil society, could push that those are made accessible online of anybody paid by public funds, just as salaries should be declared on public funds for each and every position, then that would be live, available data. We had a case of a governor supposed to be worth so many billions, he says that, and others.
Yes.
If we were able to have those and pushed for those to be available online, and we have what is going on at the Registrar General, that is, Registrar of Companies being publicized, then citizens in that particular area for themselves could search, what does my governor earn? What did he declare for the last 3 years? It's now time for election. You can actually see it. You can be able to have investigative journalists and others publishing reports of what people earn, what they did before. It is that sort of information that allows people, if it's there, to be able to make up their mind, was this person corrupt or not? Was this organization corrupt? Just as I've said, things to do with all the audit reports of every single parastatal and every single government department should be available online for people to see. All procurement that you've had procurement, now I understand, is available online. Who are the vendors? Who are the winning bids? Let them be online. Let's have open government that you can be able to track. It is those mechanisms and systems that allow you.
I agree, and I just want to respond to that, because I think that it's something that has already been dealt with. In 2004, when the system of asset declarations by public officials was implemented by the government at the time, civil society did push, led very much by Transparency International Kenya, for this to be made public.
Yes.
Because in Zambia, the asset declarations were actually published by civil society every year.
Yeah.
We said, if they can do it in Zambia, why don't we do it here?
Absolutely.
It was stopped in Parliament.
Yeah.
The MP said that it would be a big risk and they'll be kidnapped, and a lot of excuses were made. Now, so the push continued. The push was from civil society. The pushback came from the political class. And I think that we've got to continue that push. In terms of the earnings of public officials being published, that is something that has been there before. Again, 2003, 2004, the salaries of certain public officials. I know when I was a public official, my salary was inside the government estimates, very clearly. You know exactly how much I was earning every month. And I think that we have two things. I think it's very important to make it to get this information online. We have an increasing number of agencies that are dedicated to also unpackaging this data and presenting it in a manner that wananchi are able to consume it.
Yes.
Because sometimes this information is available. I think it's either this next Tuesday when the Auditor General is going to be presenting his reports again to Parliament, and you know, one guarantee is that we're going to find quite a number of scandals in there, and they'll take time to unpack it. So building that capacity is important. Again, that's a role which I think Kenyan civil society has been able to play extremely well. You know, if you look at civil society across the region in engaging these issues.
But when we talk about the exercise of wealth declaration, could we say that also this is an exercise in futility? Because there is a tripping wire also in the Constitution that after all these people now they've declared their wealth, and the form itself actually is stashed in an envelope and stored away. What is the rhyme or reason for me actually to declare my wealth, and then this particular document that I have, itemizing all my wealth, is actually put in an envelope and stashed away because there is a law that says that particular document should be in an envelope and stocked away? So who knows what? And what is the rhyme and reason of having that particular law? I don't know what particular article of the Constitution in this. Maybe the legal minds will help us here, John Kigoro, to tell us, does it make any leak of sense to have all this exercise, everyone declaring their wealth, then we have all that listed and put in an envelope, no one knows what is in the envelope?
Diban, this debate about wealth declaration is a tool in the overall set of infrastructure or mechanisms to promote integrity in public affairs. So it's just one of very many things. There are many other things that ought to be in place, but a system of integrity in the management of public resources is founded on three pillars. The first pillar is political leadership. You've got to have clear political leadership that the country is moving in a particular direction. That there is no evident political leadership in the fight against corruption or in the promotion of integrity, and we can give many examples that communicate that idea, but that's the most important of the three pillars. The second pillar is institutions, processes, and so on and so forth. So that is where the wealth declaration things come in, but it's not the only one. You've got to have investigative agencies that work. You've got to have action on reports that are made, and so on and so forth. There, you've got to have audits. So that is the second pillar. The third pillar is you've got to have public support for integrity. That this is, we are all committed to this way of life, and that is also not necessarily evident. And one of the ways in which public support for that for that choice is undermined by the first pillar, political leadership. Because what happens with political leaders is they incite the public to have to prevaricate about whether or not the fight against corruption is a good thing. This whole idea, mtu wetu, so on and so forth. So those are the wealth declaration is a small strand of a large pillar. But the most important pillar, which is political leadership, is itself absent. So we can talk about wealth declaration and say it is working, it is not working, but it isn't the only thing working, and it is not the most important thing that is not working.
That's a very huge general statement about political leadership not working. There's so many political leaders, from 47 governors to MPs to the executive. I think through my career, I've seen some changes. We move forward, we move back. In some aspects, we get better. In some, we get back. And I mean, the issue of parliament itself, yes, as a political leadership, them refusing for that issue to be published tells you what that political leadership in that circumstances are. But I think we've taken many steps forward, sometimes back. In some areas, we are right up there, and some areas we're not. So I think it's quite a mixed bag.
It's a mixed
You know, particularly from a private sector and personal. I mean, there are things we've seen completely change because of technology. We've seen what technology does in e-citizenship, in IDs, getting IDs, the way Monenchi was frustrated in getting passports, in getting a lot of documentation, in paying your taxes. KRA has certainly improved tremendously. There are still issues, but I think we made step changes. When I first went into government, I remember dealing with John in the first government of Kibaki and trying to clean up. There was real goodwill. I mean, we were talking about one organization where I was, and we brought international companies and in other areas to really clean up government. And there was such an enthusiasm and a move to claw back assets and deposits abroad. And I've seen some in this, you know, in the previous or current this regime, but we keep going back and going backwards. I like the way you put it, in that there is that goodwill, political leadership, then there's the systems and structures, then there's the people themselves really getting up and demanding accountability of their leaders. And I'm hoping I see some of that happening at the county level, because government is very near to them and they see that that is not taking place. The citizenry then are saying, we are tired. They come into the county government and saying, we are going to have a service. I think we've moved somewhat forward, but still the political leadership as a huge whole of MPs, MCAs, and others, there are some areas we really do go backwards sometimes.
Right. Let's say from Samahochi, because I think that particular question about the witness as well, or wealth declaration, as far as the constitution is concerned, is it a tripping wire where we have the envelope also? You can address it briefly, and add on also your thoughts as well.
Just as my colleagues have mentioned, I think wealth declaration process was not meant to be academic, and it is not in the constitution actually.
It is not.
The requirement of consent of the person who has declared to be given for opening of the envelope is contained in a statute.
Yes, that statute.
Yeah? So I think that renders it useless. What we don't know clearly is what the state does with the information, or does it just seal the envelope and keep it? Is it, maybe Mary will tell us, or John, because they were in government. When the declarations are made, are they analyzed? Does the state take measures towards understanding what is being declared? Or is it just a form, a public officer signs it, puts it in an envelope, it is sealed, and that is it? From the perspective of civil society, I think the purpose of wealth declaration, as George had mentioned, was for purposes of ensuring that should there be disputes on what this public officer owns, or if there are allegations of impropriety on the part of the public officer, it becomes easy to determine how have you acquired your assets and properties. But we don't know. We don't know whether what the wealth declaration process serves at the moment.
Okay, John, you say that the constitution is a tool Kenyans use to control the elite. What do you mean?
I think the point I was making is that there's an extent to which, if you look at the struggle that Kenyans have engaged in to change the constitution, to remove section 2A and to promulgate the constitution that we have now in 2010.
Yes.
There's discussion now about changing it again. Yes, ultimately if you look at the demands that come from the people, if you read through the very extensive comments that the Professor Yash Guy team got as they went around the country, getting Wananchi's comments on what they wanted in the constitution, it was very clear that one thing that Kenyans wanted to do was to manage what they felt was a very rapacious, small elite at the top of our society that is mismanaging and stealing their resources, and also treating them in a totally unaccountable manner. And Wananchi was saying, okay, let's have a constitution that protects us. It's almost as it's our shield and defender from the elite. So yes, the constitution is in a sense a tool for us to manage and to protect ourselves from this elite. But that was slightly tongue in cheek. Ultimately, the Constitution says the people are sovereign, and it's really the contract between us as a society and how we want to live that is expressed in that document, and that's why people put a lot of truck into it. Yes, but for Wananchi, yes, we cry back to the Constitution. People rush to court, to the Supreme Court, etc., to be able to find some respite from the excesses of an elite that has run riot, especially now. And I say especially now, Debril, because we're in an unprecedented situation where Kenya is implementing essentially an IMF. It's not designed by them, but it's an IMF template austerity program. We had climbed out of that by 2010. We have climbed back into this hole simply because of our profligacy and corruption. And it's Wananchi. You're paying for it, I'm paying for it, but ordinary Wananchi, the cost of paraffin, the cost of just food and daily living is paying for this. And I think that's painful, and that causes this ngumunikering that you're hearing, this disquiet that you're hearing amongst Wananchi, that we've gone backwards. Yes, Kenya has moved forward tremendously. We're collecting a lot more in taxes. Yes, you can go in and get your passport. In hours. It used to take forever to get. And so yes, Kenya has moved forward, but I think Kenyans have a right to demand, and that's what makes us a unique and dynamic and thriving society, that we are always pushing ourselves. We always want more. We're not satisfied. Kenyans, President Moi used to say, Kenya is an island of stability in a sea, and you'd compare us to Somalia and other places. And I would always say Kenyans don't compare themselves to failed states. And it's very sad if we're going to have leaders now who economically, due to real recklessness, lead us in that kind of direction.
Right. Let's say from Georgia, there are no messiahs. We are our own messiahs. But do you think there is a collective angst amongst Kenyans? Because the sense right now is a sense of despondency amongst the citizens, that our leaders have failed us. We've thrown our hands in the air. Let it be like it is right now. There's nothing much that we can do. We're actually controlled by the political elite in this country. So how can we be our own messiahs when we do not have that particular grit and the sheer resilience to even go through the fight? We feel like we're actually backed on the wall right now.
I think we are coming from a place where, if you just take the last 5 years of these governments, they came to office, had huge promises for the country. We'll do this, we'll build this number of stadiums across the country, and very many things. They had promises of glitter for all of us, but that has not particularly materialized. But that has also not stopped them from promising us. They still make more promises, and there's no acceptance. There's no overt acceptance on their part that the things that they promised have not been delivered on, and the contrary is quite the case, that there's been significant failure to achieve anything that is beneficial in terms of the public interest. So that's the space we are in. So we're in a space where there's been failure, but that failure hasn't had political consequences for anybody. The people are still in charge, they're still promising more, and they're still taking us down a path that is going to hurt us. So, so either we believe them and postpone our own agency, postpone our own taking responsibility for ourselves, or we rise up now and say, this is our country, and we're going to come together and organize ourselves in a manner that we assert our own leadership for our own selves and determine for ourselves where we want to go as a country. So that is where I'm saying the people who had a messianic entry into public office and promised us many things haven't delivered on those things, but there are no consequences to them. So do we wait until when do we wait until before we take action and take control of our own lives?
George, and political consequences seen in elections, if you're going to have rule of law and order, and you're saying there are no political consequences, but political consequences are then in an election, whether you're an MCA, an MP, a president, a deputy, a party, you reap what you sow in the elections. And I know that's another debate. So when you say that then you will organize yourselves to be able to demand or take control, what is that? Because for me, is to hold them accountable throughout that process, and then and every day harp on it, take them onto account on every single thing they say that they will do and haven't done, and then at the end of those 5 years or 2 years or whatever it is, you hold them responsible, and by this consequence you say, bye-bye, I'm going to another party. I'm just wondering. I'm
glad you raised that. It would be a nice thing to do if elections worked. The point is elections don't work in this country. Let's
your opinion.
But yeah, let's just talk about the last election, 2017, just last year, recent memory. So we go into this election, which is annulled by the Supreme Court. And like we've had all grouses in relation to all the previous elections, but this one is actually annulled by the Supreme Court because the Supreme Court says there were illegalities and irregularities, and then it orders a fresh election. That fresh election is not materially better than the first election that was annulled, because then violence and the disorder and entropy just sets in such a manner that the quality of management is significantly deteriorates. But the message being sent by the political leadership is that whatever you do, we'll always have our way. If you go to court and whatever the courts give you or whatever the courts tell you, we will not only not obey it, but we will also scare everybody so hard, Msando and so on and so forth, into ensuring that we have our way. So elections as a mechanism for renewing society, as a mechanism for ensuring that ordinary people have a way of expressing how they feel about how they've been governed, are not working at the moment, and that is part of the problem that we have as a country.
All right, let's hear from Sam as well, because you say that this particular movement is aiming at to take back leadership and also to take back resources. Could we expound on this? When we talk about taking back leadership and taking back resources, what essentially do we mean? Are we facing a country, or are we in a country where there is a leadership crisis from your own appraisement?
I think it's taken a couple of months in formulating the 10 points. And as I had mentioned earlier on, that this has been a mutation from Kura Yangu, Sauti Yangu, we the people. And it's becoming bigger because we are seeing even trade unions moving in and joining us. We are seeing faith-based groups. And we are starting on the premise of, can we try to identify the problem? So when you look at leadership as Kenyans, can we ask ourselves the question, do we have leadership that is satisfactory? Do we have leadership that Kenyans can be proud of? We have seen mediocre leadership at very high levels as a result of the elections. Is this what we anticipated? Nairobi is a crucial and important economic hub for this country. And we know how the governance systems in Nairobi operate today. Is this what we really expected? What is the role of the citizen? So when you talk about we need to assert a leadership, we need to have a candid conversation. What kind of leadership do we want in this country? Do we want criminals? Do we want to celebrate criminals? Yeah? When we talk about resources, for example, how are our resources being managed? Because these grievances and complaints are all over. Yeah? When policies are being formulated, are they people-oriented policies, or are they just economic policies because somebody is sitting calculating figures and saying the state will make this kind of billions without looking at the people? Does the state exist for the people, or does it exist by itself? I think those are the critical questions. What is our sovereignty as a people? What is our role? And this is a conversation that seeks to empower the people first. Let us assert ourselves, let us assert our rights, so that with all these groupings, whether it's political elites or business community, at the end of the day, Kenya exists for the sake of these people, the citizens. And we'll be here for a short time. What are we leaving our children, our grandchildren? Yeah? Will their lives be much more better? If we were to ask and pose that question, will their lives be much more better than today? I don't think so. So we need to have a candid conversation. What is leadership and integrity? What is the spirit in the Constitution?
Okay.
I hear you and I agree with you 100%. And I remember saying the same thing a couple of weeks ago, and I was challenged as to whether we ourselves as citizens actually take that participative ownership and responsibility to be part of that debate. And I was talking about Nairobi and complaining about this road and this and that. And somebody told me, you don't go to those meetings. You don't, and they put in the newspapers. We don't go. We don't text our MCA. We don't. And he gave me examples of things that he has done, seeing a road being done. It wasn't up to the whatever feed. He texted. They got the people to go. So I think the issue is, how do you mobilize ourselves, we the people, to be part of each discussion and to go? Otherwise, then you'll be subject to capture of a few civil societies who also go and say what they want without getting the population to go. I always see those things in the newspaper. They're debating this budget, the day here, Kwale, or this place. Do people go? Very few go. So those with interest, if it's industry lobbyists, they will write what they want. Association of Manufacturers, KEPSA, they will do this. We as our ordinary people, how do we take responsibility and know we are part of that process? And to me, mobilizing our citizenry, ourselves, to know there's nobody who's going to build Kenya for you other than yourself. How do you physically participate at that individual level? That to me is a major problem. Because there are some counties you hear they're doing very well. Their governors are doing very well, and there are some where there's absolutely, nothing going on.
All right. Even as we're preparing to give our headline thoughts, we'll come to you, Sam. Maybe, George, you will tell us right now. Yes, we have this particular initiative. What are we aiming to achieve? Do we have any particular timelines? Or will it just be another initiative, a flash in the pan, taper off, then we'll have another initiative coming without even getting the results of this actually, and having some of the high spots that we were actually gagging for or really fronting for?
I think, thank you very much for asking that question, because then it takes us back to like the central discussion that was planned for this morning. So what we are planning to do is to help citizens, to motivate citizens to organize themselves to make concerted demands that improve their own lives. That's really it. And the way to do that would be to help citizens come together in different parts of the country. If you go around the country, this country has a lot from very many aspects of failure. If you go to the northern half of the country, huge amounts of violence that is perpetrated by different actors, some of them state actors, some of them local militia against local populations. If you come into the cities, the poorer neighborhoods, huge amounts of violence in the form of extrajudicial executions and so on and so forth. So the country hurts from very many different problems, and people don't have something that organizes all these separated, individualized struggles. So what we are trying to do through this movement is to bring a collective thread that organizes different people and their struggles into a commonality that has a concerted demand that is capable of being noticed. So that's the first thing. The second thing is to organize them to realize that their problems are related to how governance choices, how governance decisions are being made and have been made, and if those decisions are changed, if the process is changed for making those decisions, that has an effect on their own individual positions. And then if you have a critical mass, then make demands and take matters into their own hands in terms of improving their own lives. So the first part of this is informational. Then organizing people to first of all giving them information, and using that information. Once they have that information, they will understand what their problems are. They will also discuss the solutions, and also and come up with a pathway, a roadmap to achieving those solutions. And because they will then be a critical mass, they will be able to make demands that yield what they want for themselves.
Yeah. Johnny Gidongo, your closing remarks briefly as we wrap up.
I couldn't agree more with what George has just said. But if you look at the Kenya Tuitakayo charter that was read yesterday, one of the key objectives is also to protect our constitution. A great deal of struggle has a lot of Kenyans have struggled a great deal to reach where we've reached with this very special constitution that we have as a country, and therefore it needs protection, especially key elements of it like devolution. So this time, with this permutation of Kenya Tuitakayo, perhaps some of the greatest energy might not actually be seen here in Nairobi, but out in the counties. And yesterday, even though we were meeting in Nairobi for the event, many of the people who are there came from around the country, and some of the most energized groups are in the counties, directly involved in the governance choices that are impacting on their lives on a daily basis in their counties, and them being able to come together with colleagues from other counties and share experiences and lessons is extremely important. So that's another very important objective.
Thank you. Mary, your closing remarks.
Yes, I just got concerned when I heard George saying take matters into our own hands, citizens, and then sort of, decide the solutions. But then he went on to say on what they can do. So that makes me feel comfortable that people are taking ownership and accountability to do something, and we're moving away from the mulika mwizi kind of approach. We're always pointing on what's happening without taking ownership and responsibility to demand what we are actually required. So that makes me feel positive.
Thank you. Sam, finally, your closing remarks. And
my only closing remarks are to the Kenyans. Those who think they are comfortable, it's good, it's okay. Those who think there are issues that need a conversation, because we have had this experience. The launch yesterday was not just the first thing we did. So, for example, when you talk to hawkers in Nairobi, you start from the premise, do you have any issues? If they don't have any issues, you tell them, thank you very much. If they have issues, then you start processing those issues and you see what is their role, what role can they take up, what are their responsibilities, and who else can come in. So we intend to proceed on this basis, and I tend to think that participation, genuine public participation is key. When I say genuine, I also do not mean some of the public participation we have witnessed.
Thank you.
From 2010.
Thank you. And of course, Kenyans have issues. Just read one or two tweets as we're winding up. Abdallah Mudambo is saying the Kenya Tuitakayo is that which cares for the people, protects the dignity of all, and where all of us are able to realize our aspirations on an equal basis. Also, we have David Gadura saying genuine democracy in Kenya and our politics. Genuine democracy in Kenya and our politics not to interfere with the economy and above all maturity in our politics. Also, we do have Karani Onsomo saying just, inclusive, healthier. This is what they want. Also, we do have Whitney Micheni saying transparency, accountable and uncorrupt. That is what they desire. Right. Thank you very much for your valued company, and also to our panelists this morning, Sam Mohochi, who is the ICJ of, is the Executive Director of ICJ, that is the International Commission of Jurists. Also, thank you to Mary Mukindia. She is the CEO of CDI Africa and also Executive Coach. Thank you for coming through. Also, the Executive Director of Kenya Human Rights Commission, George Kigoro. Thank you for coming through. And also the CEO of Inuka Kenya Trust. Thank you for coming through, John Gidonga, as well. We really do appreciate, and we hope Kenyans will run with this initiative to make sure that, yes, we have the Kenyan, the ideal Kenyan that we all aspire for. Thank you very much for your valued company. Living with Us is up next.